Don't fuck up. Don't fuck yourself. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Rude Cooking School podcast. I'm your host, John Hauser III. I'm here solo this week. There is an epidemic going on in the cooking world. No. My wife and I were watching TV the other day. And we were watching Alton Brown being interviewed. He's got a new book. Seems really cool. It's like a memoir. I'll probably read it as soon as it comes out. But he was talking. He was talking with an interviewer, and an interviewer said, "What's the one thing that you really wish people would learn about cooking?" And he said something to the effect of, "People really need to learn to read recipes." And as soon as he said it, I just started smiling to myself like a maniac and just side-eyed my wife, who immediately started laughing and kind of side-eyed me with like a face. And I didn't look at her. And the more that Alton Brown talked about, the things that people mess up and how they mess up and why they mess up, I just kept side-eyeing my wife like, and she just kept looking at me like, needless to say, my wife sometimes has issues reading recipes. She goes through them very quickly. She doesn't pay attention to ingredients or misses them a lot. She doesn't read through it properly. She misses a lot of steps sometimes, or steps creep up on her. So this is going to be a really quick episode. I just thought this would be a really fun topic to talk about by myself to you, to iterate how important it really is to understand and comprehend recipes. A well-written recipe is a good it's a good map, a good blueprint for a good meal. That doesn't say you got to completely stick to it. You can change whatever fuck you want. You might really fuck it all up, but you won't know until you read through it. Experienced cooks can look at things and know what they can change and what they can't. Inexperienced cooks should always, in the beginning, just do the recipe. Sure. If it says 5 cloves of garlic and you want 10, go for it. But in the beginning, when you're starting to cook, it's always good to read the recipe, read it a couple times, understand what it means, and then execute that, right? And then the more you do it, the better you get at, okay, I can change this, or I can swap that out, or I don't have to really do that, or that kind of thing. But you should still read through it to understand where you're at and what it means. A lot of people ask me like, oh, so what do you do for recipes? It's like, when I make a dinner, I usually I research like 5 good recipes, and then I just cherry pick what I want, and then I kind of write my own recipe out based on those, knowing how it's going to be using my brain tongue or my, like, I know how things are going to usually turn out just by looking at it, kind of, you know what I'm saying? Like, because I've got that much experience in the kitchen, and a lot of people do, but a lot of people don't. And a lot of people get fucked by not reading the recipe. And even the more important thing is to get well versed in reading recipes to understand when you see a bad one. And man, are there some really, really bad ones out on the internet, because any ding dong can just make up their fucking, grandma's dump cake and whatever the fuck it is. And it's just garbage, right? Like, you see the videos on, Facebook or TikTok or Blue Sky or, Twitter or whatever the fuck. And it's just all these, a lot of them are fake. A lot of them are just rage bait for you to go why did you dump the cream cheese into the Jello mold? Like that kind of shit. Like it's all nonsense, just made to enrage you to watch the whole thing, just to get madder and madder, and then comment on it because they get paid for clicks and they get paid for time. They have commercials in the middle of these things. But the same thing goes with some of these recipes. Like there are people that it doesn't matter. They just write them out. And as long as you click on the link, they get paid for that click, or even worse, in the last 2 years, there's a big influx of AI recipes and they are garbage. And you can see immediately what they are. Some of them have weird, ingredients. Famously, there's the one where they were talking about making, I guess it was pizza, and the AI bot told them to put like Elmer's glue in it. But some of it's not as nefarious as that. Some of them are just like silly and they don't make sense, or they're so poorly written. It's like trying to read space, like someone who just doesn't speak any language. Like the syntax of it is just really off. And it's like, when an alien comes down and tries to speak like me from space, probe anal, Christ, that makes sense. But you know what I'm saying? Like getting used to seeing recipes and how they should work, and when really successful ones work, to recognize and break down why they work. If you go to Christ, even if you just go to the Food Network, their recipes are really well written because they need to be written they need to be written for a wide swath of people who have a wide swath of experience, beginners to experts. So it needs to be concise, and people need to understand the ease of it or the complexity of it. So, with that said, I'll say, when I get tripped up sometimes, I see a recipe and I'm like, oh, that looks good. And I'll stash it away. And then, okay, I have a leg of lamb that I've had in my fridge now for like over a week. And every time I'm like, okay, well, I think I want to grill it. Maybe I don't. Maybe I want to put it in the oven. Maybe I don't. And then I start like reading recipes and shit. And a lot of them are like, all right, salt it and let it sit for 24 hours. And I'm like, fuck. Okay, well, that means not today. Okay. And then, you look into the time that's spent and okay, is this going to be a slow cook? Is this going to be a long cook? Am I going to, 225 it, 250 it in the oven, or, low and slow and then reverse sear it? Or am I going to do sort of the same thing on the grill where I cook it low and then at the end just really put the spurs to it over the coals? But, you got to read the recipes as to what kind of recipe that is. Because some of them are just literally like, all right, throw some fucking salt and pepper on that motherfucker, put it in the oven at 450, and then, and some of them are like, yeah, put it in for 450, let that go for 35 minutes, then turn it down. Some of them are like, heat your oven up to 450. As soon as you throw the lamb in there, turn it down to 350. Some of them are like even reverse of that. Put it in at 225, then turn it up to 500, or put it in at 300. You know what I mean? So understanding that kind of thing is sometimes tricky, especially with the preheat oven thing, because some people literally think it's like, okay, well, I just put it to 350, I can put my food in. No, you got to let your oven come up the temperature and then like give it at least another 10 minutes, because it's probably not really that hot. If you have something in there that holds the heat for you, like some people have, pizza stones. I have a baking steel, which is literally like a slab of steel that you can bake pizzas and shit on, breads and stuff. Or mine actually comes out and you can put it on top of the stove and you can fry eggs and stuff on. It's great. I don't get money for saying that. I just really enjoy the product. That holds heat, so that's really nice. But make sure that you your oven is to temperature when you do it. Another thing is like things that have to be prepped beforehand, like what I said about, dry brining a piece of meat. Like, how long are you going to do that? Does it need to be an hour? Does it need to be 30 minutes? Does it need to be 24 hours? Depending on the recipe, might be, you might fuck yourself because you're like, all right, I'm going to start it now. I got 2-3 hours to make this. And then you start reading the recipe and it's like, oh shit, I should have started this last night, or I should have started it this morning. Read it beforehand, so you don't start and then get into the recipe and then have to stop and find a new recipe. Always read your recipe first. Like, that's number one. I mean, I've gone through a bunch of lists. I actually found Alton Brown's guide to reading a recipe. And that's a really good, list. And then there's another one that I have of that I think is a little bit more on baking, but they all make really good points. One thing that I did, and I still do when it's complex and I just need a good way to go through things. Like when I do Thanksgiving or when I do Christmas dinner, I physically write the recipe out into a notebook, like in Sharpie, in big letters, in big steps, one, big one, and then there's a circle around it, and then the step next to it, 2, bloom, and then on the other side of the paper, I have the ingredients list. So then I can go through the ingredients, mark them off with a Sharpie, get my mise en place together, which is the second thing that you do after you read and reread the recipe. You get your mise together. You get all the stuff ready to go before you start cooking, because sometimes you got something in the pan and then you got to cook. I mean, you got to cut something up. You got to chop something up. You got to open a can, or you got to, peel a thing. And all of a sudden you're not paying attention to that thing that's in the pan. And then that thing in the pan gets burnt and you're screwed. You got to start back over. Have all of your ingredients ready to go. I know it seems fussy and it seems like a waste of time, but like when you see people on TV, that's how they cook. That's how you should cook. When people in restaurants cook, that's how they cook. They have their mise done. They have a bunch of containers at their station. When they're cooking, everything's already chopped. Everything's already segmented. Everything's already portioned. That way they can maximize their time and efficiency and get your food to you as quick as possible. And, doing your mise before you cook is kind of the calm before the storm, where you can really think about, how you're going to effectively, make this recipe work. You can go over the steps in your head, or, think about things that you would like to change, or, while you're doing it. And, sometimes it's nice to just gather your thoughts and calm yourself down before you cook. Cause some people honestly get a little anxious before they cook. It's not a thing that they enjoy. So having everything set up for success for you in the beginning will stop you from failing in the end. It's a really big thing. And then it's the cooking part, right? And so again, going back to my write out the recipe thing, which when you're first starting to cook, this really helps because you see the steps, they're in your hand. You can, read it really quickly instead of trying to fucking go through your phone with everything's really small. Sometimes the screen goes down. You can't touch the thing. You got shit all over your hands. Like, a shitty binder book or, a little book that you can just put notes in that can get wet. You don't really care about. It's not your $1,000 phone. Which you're going to just cross through anything with your Sharpie or your marker or your pencil or your pen. That's what cooking's about. It's fine. Then you go through. All right. What's step 1? Heat up the pan over medium heat. Great. Do it again. Heating up your pan over medium heat. What's that mean? Okay. You put the pan on medium heat. Which is that? Oh, well, that's number 5. It's understanding what everything means, right? That's number 5 on the dial. That's medium heat. From 1 to 10, medium, 5. Excuse me. Next thing is, okay, what does heating up the pan mean? Well, that means heating up the pan. You don't put the pan on medium heat and immediately throw your onions in, because a lot of times the recipes start with cooking onions first. But like, you have to let that sit depending on what kind of pan you have. Don't do it with non-stick stuff, because that stuff burns up. But get your pan warm. Get your pan to medium heat. When you put your stuff in, you want to hear the sizzle of the ingredients. And that's a big thing. Like, I've had people over my house that when I start a recipe or I start cooking, I just put my pan on and it's heating up. And they're like, your pan's on. I'm like, yeah, I know. What are you doing with your pan? I'm heating it up. Dude, it's been on there for like a minute. Yeah, it needs to be on for like 5. If I'm searing something, I want that fucking thing rocket hot. I want a good crust on my steak or whatever I'm doing at that point, or sometimes you want to kick off a caramelization of onions, like pop them in there. They're sizzling like a motherfucker and just stir them up, let them sit for a bit, stir them up. But you want to kick off the caramelization process. Like, sometimes that's part of the recipe. Knowing that really helps a lot of times, because starting to cook in a cold pan, depending on what it is, if you're doing an egg in a cold pan, your egg is never coming out of that pan. And if it does, it's going to be a brick. Same thing with a steak or meat. Like, starting it in a cold pan is a good way to never have that come off without ripping it off the metal. So, that's a thing you might want to think about. But having a list that you've written out that you can cross out to know where you're at really helps. If you have if you have a laptop or a screen that's properly at some level where you can easily sort of mark stuff off, that's great. I don't have that. And honestly, I don't trust that in a kitchen where there's a lot of shit flying around and liquid and knives and kids opening up cupboards and me opening up cupboards and running around like a madman sometimes to get to things. And, I'm doing multiple things at once. So for me, just writing it down and crossing things off is easy. But again, when you're starting, that helps because you get to see the repetition. You get to see the patterns. So when you read a recipe the next time, you're like, oh, there's the thing I did before. Okay, I see that that's a thing that should start off a recipe. I see that moves into that, moves into that. You see the workflow, and you see how it all comes together, and how a good recipe that's written well will help you get the best food you want to cook. So I'm going to start with the Alton Brown thing. So he says, according to my calculations, about 30% of dishes prepared from written recipes go wrong because the cooks concerned didn't actually read said recipe. Sure, we glance at them sideways, scan them, pursue them, peek at them, make grocery lists from them, but we rarely glean all the information we really need. This is especially true of dishes being prepared for the first time. Very true. Here are a few simple guidelines to prevent this from happening to you. 1, sit down. That's right. Sit down at the kitchen table and simply read the recipe all the way through. Don't make notes. Don't make lists. Just read. Great. Just read the damn recipe. Make sure you go and read it. Don't scan it. Go through everything. That was my interjection. 2, read it again. Now, highlight any special procedures or sidebars that might change your timeline by bringing them to room temperature. Or, like bringing butter to room temperature or soaking beans. That's one that used to get me. That's what he said, not me, but also me. Because that fucks me a lot when I'm doing recipes and I'm like, I got to soak the beans overnight. Fuck, now I got to go out and get a can of beans. That's happened before. And there are pre-cooking procedures, like I said, about brining the meat. Be careful to note punctuation, for instance. And by the way, reading this, I was like, oh yeah, that's a thing that I don't think people realize. And it's a really big thing when you read it and you understand it. So he says, Be careful to note punctuation. For instance, quote, 1 cup chopped nuts, end quote, is not the same as 1 cup nuts, comma, chopped, end quote. The first reference measures the nut after chopping, whereas the latter measures before chopping. Let me say this again. So 1 cup chopped nuts is not the same as 1 cup nuts, comma, chopped. So the first one, you chop up a bunch of nuts, you measure it out to 1 cup. The second one is you measure out the nuts into 1 cup and then you chop them. Completely different. They're 2 totally different weights. If you're baking, that could screw you up. You know, your measurements might be off. And that goes for anything. There's a lot of that where it's like 1 medium onion chopped, 1 medium onion, comma, chopped, like completely different. Or, 1 onion chopped, 1 onion, comma, chopped by weight. Reading, seeing that kind of stuff, because that happens actually a lot with capers, and 1 tablespoon of chopped capers is different than 1 tablespoon of capers chopped, like completely different. 3, gather the equipment. I always do this first because if there's something esoteric on the hardware list, you may to abandon the dish until the procedure can continue by getting said item, like an immersion blender or pressure cooker. Yeah, I mean, if you're doing a dish and you don't realize that it's a sous vide dish and you don't have a sous vide equipment, you're fucked. Same thing with a pressure cooker or an immersion blender. If you don't have that, maybe you can get it to work with a regular blender, but it's going to be a pain in the ass. 4, gather ingredients. Pantry ingredients and dry goods should be corralled in a staging area. Anything that's missing goes on a grocery list. I do the same thing with the refrigerator/freezer. Collect everything on one shelf, and whatever is missing goes on the grocery list. Great idea. It also helps, I have found, to put things on like a sheet pan to just keep them together. That way somebody doesn't come past and go, oh, this needs to be put away, and puts it away. If they see it together on a sheet pan or, on a, you could put them in a bowl, you could put them on a plate, you could put them in a cooking vessel just to keep everything together while you're collecting your thoughts and getting your shit together. That way you don't lose it. He also goes on to say, during this phase, be especially mindful of ingredients that may need to be thawed or brought to room temperature. Keep in mind, recipe writers list ingredients in order of use, typically from largest amount to smallest. This is also a cue for the cook as to how the ingredients should be measured and used. For example, dry ingredients for a cake will always come one right after the other, so it's easy for you to corral them onto one bowl before adding them to a wet mix. So when it says, flour, baking powder, baking soda, yeast, salt, if you're making bread or whatever, you're making scones or whatever the hell that would be, you put all that stuff together, whisk that together, and then you add your liquid, you add that to your liquid. The way that things come in order is always on purpose. No, they're not going to have like the onions at the bottom and the steak at the top. You're not putting your steak in first. Good recipe writers write them succinctly. 5, note the order of steps. Heat the oven and prep the pans, soak the beans, before messing about with other ingredients. This will save you both time and heartache in the kitchen, and will, in the case of timely preparations such as the egg foams, it may prevent an actual disaster. Like if you're making a souffle and you are doing things like you don't realize you got to make the foam out of the egg, for the souffle to whip into whatever you're doing, you might be screwed. 6, always triple note cooking and or baking times and their doneness indicators. If the biscuit should be golden brown or buttery, Or butter should smell nutty. Your ears and eyes will tell you before any timer ever will. Yes, keep your eyes on your food, but also, make sure you have timers, make sure you have alarms, make sure you have temperature gauges. I got some pretty sweet ones for Christmas that has 4 different, I can, put it into 4 different things and put them in the oven or have them on the stove. It's like a big octopus. My next step, I'm going to start getting some wireless ones because the wires are all over the place. But for now, this works great. And, I'm a big fan of thermometers. They help a lot, especially with baking. And people don't realize that. We'll talk about that in the next part. But baking with thermometers is a really, really good thing. Like, a lot of people are like, oh, just stick a fucking toothpick in. If it comes out, yeah, I'd rather know that the inside's close or not close than just, oh, it's wet. So, that kind of thing. He finishes up with saying, above all, learn to enjoy recipes as you would literature. Many recipes you'd never actually cook make for intriguing reading. Just because you're not actually going to cook Charlie Trotter's recipe for 3-day rabbit stock doesn't mean you won't get a kick out of reading it. And that's the truth. I read a ton of fucking recipes I'll never cook. I read recipes for food that I don't necessarily like. I read recipes for insane, week-long preparation dishes that I'm just like, there's no fucking way I'm ever going to do this. But seeing how certain things are made, the intricacy or how much work goes into it helps you to appreciate. One, if you go to your friend's house and they've made it for you, you realize how much fucking work they put into it. 2, when you're at a restaurant, you realize how much time it took for them to do it. Like when you go to a ramen place, if you've ever made ramen, you appreciate that fucking ramen. Because ramen is a lot of steps for a lot of work to get just a bowl of noodles and stock. You know what I'm saying? So always note the times, the cooking or baking times, and where they got to get to. Like, is it medium rare? Is it medium? Is it 200 degrees? Is it 180? Is it 185? Also, the more you cook, the more you learn that, okay, if this piece of meat needs to hit 165, I can pull it out at 155 in the carryover heat because it's so big. We'll take it to 165 in the middle and I'm good. Like that kind of thing. All right. This list is it's more for baking stuff. This was all around the recipe for smoked salmon breakfast buns. They use that as the sort of template of, read this recipe. Now let's go through. Their number 1 is surprise, read through the recipe. It says, first of all, I understand this is like reading the instruction manual to the appliance and you're all pretty sure you know how to work it. Who does that? Barely anyone. Just humor me. And before you start creaming sugar and butter, read through the entire recipe. Honestly, I'd settle for an intention scroll through the text. Believe me. They then go into just saying like, reading a recipe from beginning and end is a big deal. The instructions may have some hidden ingredients, like water, for example. That is a big thing. There's a lot of recipes that I've read that they don't include water in the fucking ingredients list. And then they're like, oh, add this with water. And then you're like, okay, now I got to stop what I'm fucking doing and go get water. And it, again, if something's already cooking, could fuck you up. Or split the ingredients with the list in an unexpected way. Like when it calls for 2 eggs, but then when you're reading down, it says use 1 egg for the batter, 1 egg for the egg wash, but you're keeping your, like, you don't want to go ahead and crack both your eggs into one thing is what I'm saying. If you read through the thing, they got to separate them. You want to know the lay of the land before you start throwing things in a bowl. 2, understand the ingredients list. A recipe's ingredients list is detailed in the order. The ingredient will be used. Not only is the recipe list a very helpful shopping list, but it also gives you insight as to how the recipe will come together. In the recipe that they used as a template, for example, we know that bread flour is the first ingredient. followed by sugar, yeast, and salt. Without even looking at the instructions, we can gather that we will whisk the sugar, yeast, salt, and flour in that order. But hey, we're not assuming anything. Refer to step 1, read the recipe. 3, we talked about this before, which is mind the comma. You'll notice the comma, blah, blah, blah. And their thing is like, for example, 2 garlic cloves, comma, minced, and 6 ounces hot smoked salmon, comma, coarsely crumbled. So, and then they give the thing of, there's a difference between 3/4 tablespoon finely grated Parmesan cheese and 3 tablespoons finely chopped capers, because there was a common one of them. 4, pack, soften, and preheat. The devil is in the details. Recipe lists also request that brown sugar be packed, where you take sugar and press it into like if it calls for 1 cup, you press it in to make like a hockey puck of sugar. And you keep adding until it's flush with the top of the measuring cup. If the recipe indicates grams versus volume measurements, you have a precise measurement of a packed cup of brown sugar. I prefer anything baking with weights. I rarely ever bake anything with volume anymore. It's just too iffy. Things get weird, especially with sugar, especially with salt. Give it to me by fucking weight, or I'm not doing it. Soften butter by allow it to rest at room temperature for about 1 hour. Don't cheat yourself for the butter by not allowing the butter to soften before combining it with the sugar and eggs. It will take you extra time to break that butter down to cream sugar into butter that's not room temperature, and it's a pain in the ass, and it fucks your recipe up, because if they're not combined perfectly, you won't have cream, butter, and sugar, and then your cake or whatever you're baking will get like weird pockets in it. It's nasty. The temperature of the ingredients is key when it comes to baking. Preheat the oven. Yeasted doughs hate a 200-degree oven, but sure do love a 325-degree oven. Again, temperature is a big deal. 5, is it done yet? And this is her last one. I'm assuming it's a woman. Doneness is recipe instructions. Wait, what? Okay. Doneness in recipe instructions, they wrote that wrong, are usually described by time range and visual cues. For example, bake 55 to 65 minutes until rolls are lightly browned. They should have an internal temp of 195 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's what I'm saying. Like, something could be slightly brown, but on the inside, it could be goo. If you have the temperature of your oven up way too high, the outside's going to look great. But then as soon as you crack them open, they're dough in the middle. This person said, I typically set my timer for 5 minutes below the lowest indicated time, just in case. You can never take back and overbake. Use time, looks, and temperature to decide if your baked goods are done. With practice, you'll be able to smell exactly when a wet recipe is done. And that's the truth if you are a seasoned baker. Some people, they get their, cake recipe and they never deviate from it for 40 years because it works and they know it from front to back. And, after the 6th or 7th time they've done it, they don't really need the instructions. They can it's in their brain. I don't recommend that. I mean, I hope you do find a recipe that you like that much, that you recreate over and over and over, but break out, try different things, try different recipes for pizza. Like, I've been obsessed with pizza now for over 15 years and it still perplexes me. Ratios for dough, like flour to waters, it makes a huge difference in what kind of crust you get for your final crust. So try different things, try different recipes, but follow the recipe every time, especially if you're trying something different. So there you go. I hope that you guys listen to this and try some new recipes and try to organize your thoughts before you do the recipe. I know I hear it from a lot of people that, they're like, I love cooking, but it frustrates me. I don't feel like I'm good at it. It makes me anxious. I wish I could do it better. And a lot of times I tell them to just pick one recipe and just do that over and over multiple times. Now a lot of people really want to just try different things all the time. And that's great. I highly recommend that too. But it's really nice to get one thing down that can teach you a lot in one recipe. Like I always go with French onion soup or English onion soup as an example, because it really helps with chopping. You get used to the knife motions, but then caramelizing and making a stock and, like really doing the thing. Cause you got to put that in the oven as well. And you're using a burner at the top, and, you're using the stove, and you're making toast and that kind of stuff. But doing it over and over will make you more loose and easygoing and relaxed. And that's what you want. You want to be relaxed in your kitchen, because that should be your place to just unwind and not really let the outside get into your house. It should be a place of escape instead of a place of stress. And if there's one thing I've tried to do throughout the series, the episodes of this podcast, I want people to realize that the kitchen should be their getaway place. That's what it is for me. Like, give me a drink, put some music on, and give me a couple hours to make some dinner, and I'm the fucking happiest person in the world. And I don't let anything get to me there. And I hope you find that. So find a recipe this week, write it out, or, read it a bunch of times. Get the idea of what it is. Get a grocery list going, that kind of thing. And make it, and don't try to rush it. Try to make it as best as you can. Take some pictures and send it to us. We're on Facebook. Join the Facebook group. I'm on Blue Sky at Rude Cooking School. I would love to interact with you there. I'll answer any questions that you have there as well. As a final note, yesterday we found out that friend of the show, Drew Pumphrey, the owner and proprietor of the Smoke and Swine barbecue food truck, has passed away. He hasn't had the food truck for a while, but he had a brick and mortar place for a while with our buddy at Diablo Donuts, Mike, and then he was just a civilian and just doing regular work. But anytime I saw him, God, man, the biggest smile, the best hugs. He was a big dude. He fucking gave you just giant bear hugs. But his smile, his love for food, his love for cooking, and little things, learning little tricks, talking with other cooks, talking with other chefs, talking with regular people about barbecue, because a lot of people that are fucking amazing at barbecue aren't even cooks, man. They're just dudes or women at their house that fucking just make good Q. And he loved that shit. He was a fucking great guy. He's a really, 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 really nice person. And I will very, 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 very much miss him. So, yeah. Hug your friends, hug your family, pet your dog, make yourself some yummy food, and raise a glass to Drew when you can. Okay? Thank you very much for listening to the Rude Cooking School podcast. I was your host, John Hauser III. Don't yuck my yum. Love you. Thank you for listening. Peace.